Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this Wellbeing Blueprint event, the intersection of civil legal justice and well-being. We've got folks coming on and joining us. I see folks are introducing themselves in chat. Please continue to do that. I am Tanya Tucker, and I'm with the Full Frame Initiative, and we're proud to be part of this growing group of public sector, nonprofit, and community leaders who all share a commitment to drive structural changes that move us toward a country where actually everybody has a fair shot at well-being. And the principles and recommendations that are a part of the blueprint really cut across sectors, systems, issues, and geographies. And so our topic today is actually a perfect one because the civil legal system actually touches the lives of all of us, every person in our country, and it cuts across multiple systems. And a person's access to real, meaningful civil legal support can really have an outsized impact on their well-being. So we are really happy to have with us today Sandra Ambrozy, who's a non-resident fellow for the Center on Nonprofits and Philanthropy at the Urban Institute. She is our speaker today and going to lead our discussion of really how this well-being blueprint is providing a platform to transform and to connect the civil legal system with other systems to really accelerate well-being. There will be a Q&A portion. We want to make sure that we leave time to engage you all and hear your questions and get your comments. So during that time, we'll call on folks to use the raise your hand function, and we'll call on you to hopefully come out of the shadows and turn your videos on so we can actually see and hear you ask a question. But you can also use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen, to type in a question throughout the webinar. We'll be monitoring that and we'll get to those questions as well. Just so you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will upload the recording and the slides to the Blueprint website. This event is also closed captioned, so all you have to do is click CC closed caption in your Zoom window to view that. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Sandy. Sandy?
Thank you, Tanya. This, what an opportunity to just be here and to talk about this. I want to thank the entire Full Frame Initiative team, include you, Tanya, and Katja, and Phyllis, and Matthew, for all your time and attention to pulling this together. And I want to thank the participants on the phone for joining yet another Zoom webinar. I was trying to think of a way to introduce perhaps a Zoom bingo or something to that extent. So without it formalizing it, if you hear or see these five things, put bingo in the chat and we'll think of a prize for you. Either a dog barking, words such as pivot and synergy, an aquarium in the background, or any Latin word results in bingo. So before we get started, I want to introduce you all to each other. And this is an extreme oversimplification, but there are essentially two groups of champions on this call. One representing the civil justice sector, and the other the larger social sector. And I believe this distinction is more dominant than the fact that many of you are also working in the public sector or in nonprofit. And while working in these different sectors, you are all extraordinary for similar reasons. You are responding to the immediate needs at your front door, and literally for some of you who operate direct service organizations, while also working on systems change. And you've stepped outside of your budget and institutional constraints to be creative and innovative. And in my mind, that makes you next generation leaders. So I know many of you are familiar with the Wellbeing Blueprint, as some of you helped develop it, and Tanya's going to talk about it a little bit more later on. But for others, let me just do a quick introduction. The Wellbeing Blueprint is with principles and recommendations to drive structural change, as Tanya said, so that everyone has a fair shot at well-being. It is not meant to be a static document that lives on a shelf. Rather, it's meant to evolve and be strengthened as it is adopted. And so our discussion today is going to significantly help that process. The Full Frame Initiative is a key partner in spearheading this work and defines well-being as the needs and experiences universally required to have health and hope. And these needs and experiences are having social connectiveness, stability, safety, mastery, and that's the degree to which we feel in control of our fate and the decisions we make, and last, meaningful access to relevant resources. So for those of you not familiar with the civil legal system, here's some background. In the US, the laws and policies that give people their rights and protections are part of the system. So in your head, I want you to think about these questions. How many of you on this call have gone through a divorce or had friends and family go through the process, sought custody of children, guardianship of a parent or relative, been denied a job or a promotion because of your race, gender, sexual orientation, or needed a personal protection order? These are a few of the issues addressed by our civil legal system, and I suspect that you or those closest to you drew on resources, such as an attorney, to navigate these situations. And as you know, however, there is no right to counsel for civil cases, only in criminal. And even though these issues have life-changing consequences, an estimated 30 million people go it alone each year in court because people can't afford an attorney or because the free assistance is stretched so thin that it's not available. And it's very important to underscore that not every case needs an attorney, but because the system was designed by and for attorneys, they are often what's necessary to navigate the system. That's changing though, and as the examples that we're going to discuss later on provide. And as a result of the consequences from these cases, the path to well-being often winds through the civil justice system. So let me just step back for a second and say why I think this blueprint provides an important platform to integrate the two sectors represented on this call. So overall, I think the blueprint offers the scaffolding to hold complexity, and it creates the docking stations for you sectors to connect. So for the civil justice sector, it offers shared language to move your work from the legal frame to a justice frame, where your efforts to help people know their rights, protect their rights, solve their legal issue, and have procedural fairness without bias is part of the larger opportunity system that fully supports people's efforts to have a fair shot at well-being. And those in the civil justice community know well Becky Sandiford's efforts to have that, to raise that question and to try and move that frame from a legal one to a justice frame. And I think the blueprint helps contribute to that. And as next generation, it's hard words and language to describe working you are because it's different. And the blueprint helps you with that language. I think it also offers you examples and action steps to help you persuade others to join this movement and why and how they can join you so that you're not the only ones out there on the skinny branch. For the social sector, I think the blueprint offers shared language to translate what those folks in the civil legal offices or in the court are talking about. Right now, as mentioned, because the current system is designed by and for lawyers, their vital role is often obvious by legal terms. And as someone who's tried to navigate the system, I still have to look up unlawful detainer. Who knew that really means eviction, or what ex parte or ad litem means? And it's very hard to connect with the work when you don't understand the language. And so similarly, I think the blueprint offers examples and action steps to also help those in the social sector understand why your important efforts to support economic and social mobility can be derailed or undermined when barriers persist that can be removed with effective access to justice. So, as my former boss used to say, that people with means live their lives horizontally, and people without means who interact with either the legal, child welfare, affordable housing, etc., live in the verticals of these systems. And the blueprint offers a platform to change this. With shared language and understanding, these hard-coded verticals can be defined in policies and practices can be replaced with a well-being frame. And Tanya's going to walk through the overarching principles of the blueprint, and then I'm going to map some examples against that and then open it up for discussion.
Thank you, Sandy. You know, as we've both said, the blueprint really is this concrete roadmap to drive the structural change that's needed in our country. And so it is a set of 6 core principles that you see here on the slide, and I'll just quickly walk through those. So principle 1, start with what matters to people, well-being. So how do we structure our systems, our communities to really align with and tap into what is a universal human drive for well-being? And making access to well-being more equitable is vital to preventing many of the harms that our systems are set up to address. Principle 2, push against harms being concentrated in communities already facing the greatest adversity. So how do we make sure that our responses now and moving forward are really built on anti-racist, equity, and a well-being oriented platform? And this really will be vital to ensuring that our responses shrink rather than actually widen racial and economic disparities. Build on, instead of undermining, social connections and social capital in communities, right? Our drive for social connectedness is innate, it's essential, and it's universal. So, you know, we count on others, we need others to count on us, and we all need to belong. So how do we build on that instead of undermining that as systems? Build financial security. And so not only how do we address immediate financial stability for people in our country, certainly made worse by the pandemic that we're going through, but also how do we address the very persistent racial wealth gap in the country? Principle number 5 is span boundaries, and I think both Sandy and I have sort of touched on this, you know, already. So explicitly spanning not just fields, but across sectors is really essential to long-term economic recovery and for greater equity. And then our last principle, which is set our default to sustaining changes beyond the pandemic. As the blueprint was created and a diverse set of leaders came together, it really was sort of, you know, the moment of the pandemic that opened up this opportunity. But we want to make sure that these aren't just changes to get us through the pandemic, that these really are changes for long-term sustainability. And so each of these principles, we have over 40 recommendations that really help break these principles down and provide concrete ways to animate those principles and for people to take action.
All right, so thank you. I'm gonna map some examples against these principles just to get us started. They're one of the strengths, I think, of what's going on in the field right now is that I could say it helps principle 1 or 4, and we could have a lively discussion that now really it's 3 and 5. And that's a nice place to be in when we're arguing about which principle it meets. But that's the strength of the work that the Justice Champions are doing, is that it's really touching on so many core principles that advance well-being. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the first principle, and the recommendation is to use person-centered language in policy and practice. And I suspect most of the justice champions on the phone are going to anticipate that the example that I'm going to talk about is the Self-Represented Litigation Network. So in partnership, and not just the SRLN as it's, but many of you out there are in partnership with clients, customers, and others in the community are reinventing the legal system and shifting power basically by adopting plain language. In other words, using language or words that most people use to describe their situation, not calling it an unlawful detainer, but rather eviction, and simplifying the forms and processes so that it makes sense for people in the times. And SRLN, and many of you are members of this network. You represent the wide array of actors working in every state, from court administrators, judges, researchers, law school faculty, librarians, self-help directors, legal aid attorneys, who are sharing best practices. Why reinvent the wheel of plain language and simplified forms, strategies, data, research to translate the system so that people, as Catherine Alternator hopefully is still on the phone, who heads SRLN, says people can get the information they need when they need it and in a format they can use. So the next example I'm going to talk about is Principle 2, push against harms being concentrated in the communities already facing the greatest adversity. And under that is a recommendation to not use criminal history as an automatic disqualifying event. And as most of you know, the civil and criminal systems are considered distinct, at least to the courts and attorneys, but people's lives are not so separate. So people with a criminal conviction need to draw upon the civil justice system to achieve well-being. And you may also know that it's a civil procedure to expunge a person's record, and the who, what, where, and when is determined by each state. So when a person meets the eligibility guidelines for expungement, it should be automatic, but instead a person must proactively find out if they're eligible and then submit the necessary work. And according to the National Employment Law Project, there are 70 million people in the United States with a criminal record. That's approximately 1 in 3 people, a third of the US population. And it's important to note that a publicly available criminal record can include much more than felony conviction. It can also include something that happened trespassing when you were a teenager, but the record might not say that it was dismissed or you were released without charges. A warrant issued for late parking tickets, even if it was dismissed upon payment. Guilty verdict from a trial. So, and as you all know, that these records impact credit scores, housing, employment options, such as in particular professional licenses. I recently came across some information that I just, it's pretty astounding, that research conducted by the University of Michigan Law School that was published by the Harvard Law Review found that people who receive expungements see a 23% increase in income within a year. And because it can be perceived as a complicated process and or people are not aware that of their options, at least in Michigan, nearly 95% of the people who are eligible for expungement don't apply for it. So there's a fabulous effort that was undertaken. So the example is an effort that was undertaken and is going on in Maryland by Matthew Studenberg, who was then an attorney at the Maryland Volunteer Legal Services and now is at the Harvard Access Justice Lab. And he used a web search program that to find people eligible for criminal records because it was public information. He geocoded the information and used it to inform where to offer expungement clinics, proactively sent out information to notify people. And this effort now lives on something called the MD expungement website. And it's a way to, again, leverage technology, but also to try and get at more systems approaches to offering expungement for folks. But I'm really proud to say that in Michigan, in part because of this research that just came out about the 23% increase in income, Governor Whitmer signed this week 2 laws that now will make automatic expungement after a certain period of time. And I believe that that's the first in the nation that's going to do that. And that's what we need to be focused on. So if you're in the social sector, I would encourage you to champion this kind of policy change, because it's going to have significant impact on jobs, housing, economic security for folks. And for those in the legal community, and particularly those providing the direct service, please remind yourself that these efforts are helping a person achieve well-being and the economic and social mobility. It's not just case closed on something very defined, but rather is part of a larger outcome. And another example that I wanted to talk about is build on instead of undermining social connections and social capital in communities. And one of the recommendations is to remove obstacles to family members helping family members. And most of you know that under federal law, families receiving public assistance, known as TANF, must assign their rights to child support to the state. So it means that when a parent can't, or can rather, start paying child support and replacing any public benefits that the family might have been receiving, the funds that the parent is paying actually goes back to the state. It's considered child support arrears or debt. And the Urban Institute did a pilot project in San Francisco where that child support process was modified and amended. And it's, again, reminder that that process is a civil legal process. And that once the child support was amended and modified, the outcomes that they found was that parents made more consistent and timely benefit payments. It was right sized to what they could do. Parents made their child support on time, which is also, again, just emphasized. And parents' housing status and credit scores improved, and that their employment barriers were reduced. And very importantly, the relationships between the parent and child improved. So again, this is the same as with above around the expungement. If you care about social mobility, family stability, you should care about child support issues if you're in the social sector, and working with your partners to help those that you support get them modified or changed. So these are just a few of the examples, and I could have talked about the Alaska Legal Services, Pro Bono Nets, Law Help Interactive, Legal Service Corporation's efforts under the Leverage Tech to Reduce Barriers, which is part of under the second recommendation. I could have talked about under ensuring that translations are professional. I could have talked about the Justice Index at the National Center on Access to Justice, or Lift Dane's work in Wisconsin under leveraging tech. They're all efforts that I think are extraordinary, that are, again, nested in that larger scaffolding about advancing well-being. One of the things that I came to appreciate when I was working in the green building world was that if you think of it as a market, there are early adopters. And I would put you all that are participating in this call as early adopters. And typically you represent about 10% of the market. And another 20% of the market is actually eager to make change, but they're not sure how. And then once that 30% is reached, the other 70% typically fall in line. So my question to you is how in the justice community, does this well-being frame help resonate with your efforts? Is the language helpful, harmful? How do you think it would help engage the other 20% to so that you could tip the market? And then for those in the social sector, I'd ask you, how do you currently work with the legal justice community? Is it frankly more of a hassle to work with them because of what I'd say sometimes is the othering that goes on when the Latin starts getting spoken, and that it's hard to connect with the work because of again, just the difficulty in appreciating the roles and value. So I'm going to pause at this point and see if there are some questions that we can discuss. And since there's so many leaders on this phone, I might not have the answers, but I know you will.
So a reminder, if you have a question, comment, you can type it in Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question. And as folks are thinking about their questions and getting those teed up, I actually have a question for you, Sandy. You said sort of early on in your remarks about how people with means live their lives horizontally, and then people without means who interact with various systems actually live in the verticals of those systems, which really struck me. And I think I know what that means, but could you just expand on that a little bit about, what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, I think for people with means, we can seamlessly get access to resources and benefits, like our mortgage. I don't have to show 10 pieces of identification for that. It just happens. But people who intersect with affordable housing or the civil justice system, or they're the ones who have to navigate those different systems, who have different requirements and different rules and different practices in order to piece it together so that they can have their whole life. And I know Katja often talks about trade-offs in order to access one thing. Here's an example. In New York, the nuisance laws in upstate, that if you call the police too many times because, let's say, there's a domestic violence situation going on, the landlord can evict you. So that's a trade-off. Do you protect yourself, or do you try and stay in the housing? And that nuisance law was actually changed, I think it was last year, by some efforts in the legal community and other partners. But that's how a person who is experiencing who is vulnerable and often low income must live in those verticals.
Thank you. We have a raised hand from KC.
Hello, Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yep.
Hi, my name is Catrice. I'm from Philadelphia. I do community advocacy work. And what I was going to say is, I think like one of the key factors to transformation and rebuilding the system that we currently have, the legal system, is to change how we engage with language. So I think it's good. I think part of wellness is making things very simple, putting things in layman's terms, using language that people can actually understand. I believe the reason why language is often made hard to understand when it comes to the legal system is because people don't really want you to know your rights. It helps you stay ignorant of your rights. So when you put things in layman's terms, it makes things more accessible. So like the words you use about evictions, if you just say the word evictions, people know what you're talking about. But if you use that other word, people may not understand. So I think language and how we use language and making things more simple to understand is key in transforming a lot of the system and how it functions, because that gives people access to knowledge, which gives them access to be able to figure out different ways they can protect themselves from the system. And I say protect themselves because I believe the current system that we have is not made to protect, it's made to protect rich white men, and that's about it. White people in particular, and that's about it. The more money you have, the more protection you get, but you get it if you're white, period. and no one else gets protected. So language is a good way to start. And even saying things as clear and plainly as I just did is a good way to really start thinking about how we can add well-being. I wouldn't even say add well-being, but rebuild the system, the judicial system, in a well-being format. Language being a key factor in it.
Thank you so much, Catrice.
Thank you.
Vincent Schiraldi, raising your hand.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. One of the things that hello?
We lost you. We got one of the things that, and then we lost you. Go ahead.
Did some brilliant stuff after that. One of the things that worries me about replacing the current system with a wellness frame, at least for some people, is I feel like part of the system has to have a leave me alone frame before we get to wellness. Like, I just feel like there's a bunch of behavior that we suck people in for that you just should just leave them alone, like we do with white middle class people when they exhibit those behaviors. And then beyond that, maybe there's a wellness frame I could buy into, but I sort of worry about a wellness frame being a net widening project that, and so much of our justice system, probation and parole and juvenile justice particularly, suck more people in, you know, under the rubric of trying to help them.
Interesting. I would add to that, perhaps, that if you had robust civil access to justice tools and processes, you could leave people alone more.
And I'll add to that, Vincent, that a well-being frame really is about when you center on the person and what matters to them. You're absolutely right. It may not be that they need more services and more supports and more, you know, systems and programs. And so really, you know, our drive for well-being is how we live our life, all of us. And because of our different contexts, we have sort of, you know, different access to well-being, but we're all making choices and decisions every day to meet our drive for well-being. And so truly centering on that doesn't necessarily mean more programs, more services, dragging people into these systems. And I think for systems to have more of a well-being orientation to their work, they can actually look at what it is that they have in place. What are their structures and processes and practices that they're doing that actually is undermining well-being, which in some ways may be actually eliminating, you know, some services. And so I think what we're talking about here in this connection between the civil legal world and other systems is that there has been too much of a divide and sort of not an awareness of how much that system actually impacts people's lives. So are there things that actually make it more of a connected system with others to truly support people in the ways that they need supported? And so without those civil legal supports, how is that actually impacting people's well-being? Let me get to a couple of, thank you, Vincent. Let me get to a couple of the questions that are in Q&A, and then I'll get to some more raised hands. Love the engagement that is happening. So a question on, are there any ideas on how to get past the siloing of interventions? For example, legal aid often solves the strictly legal problem, but does little to build social capital more broadly.
I think that the blueprint provides the language to start that process. As sectors, both the social sector and the justice community, you have all of these elements that advance your activities, training, policies, funding, accreditation. You know, it's just there are so many things that are hard coded for it that contribute to what we used to call the cylinders of excellence rather than silos. I think the thing that's going to break that down the fastest is going to be policies and funding, and policies that focus on outcomes. Again, if you can focus on, if both public and private funders could state the outcome that they're trying to achieve, and then let the partnerships develop that will achieve that, rather than only higher education being able to, or only education funders helping someone access and success through college. Well, maybe there's other partners that can contribute to that. I think that's going to break down the silos. And give a shout out again to Schmidt Futures Fund, who did that. They said, we're doing a grant program where we want to raise the income of 10,000 people in the US by 10% by 2020. That was the funding program. They just announced that, and it caused all sorts of partnerships to be formed to achieve that. And the winning group was Lift Dane in Wisconsin. That is a legal partnership that is working on that. So I think that's going to break the silos.
Great, thanks, Sandy. Let me go to a raised hand that we have. Sarah from FCMC Self-Help Center.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
We can. Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, cool. Okay, so kind of to Kate. Uh-oh. Can y'all?
We can hear you now. We lost you for a second.
Sorry about that. So one of the things that I've observed is similar to what Casey was talking about. We're doing a pilot project real briefly. So I'm a social worker. I actually work in the eviction court, trying to connect people with the resources that they might need to prevent them getting an eviction judgment and look for new housing. One of those access things, in addition to our language, does tend to be the way that we even have it set up for people to access things. Like, all of this tech innovation has been fabulous, but also I'm sitting there at a table by myself with one intern, and then it's two people in line just to get help filling out this online application for something. And so I think sometimes when we talk about tech innovation stuff, we need to remember that not everybody accesses information in the same way. And somebody may benefit more, even if they are perfectly computer fluent, for having a conversation with a live person rather than waiting on hold for 2 hours for the Job and Family Services line. My question out of that, I'm sorry, that was really long. My question out of that is, what have y'all found helpful in terms of getting services that are supposed to be accessible to actually be more accessible, like having staff at Social Security or wherever? What does that look like?
Oh gosh, I hope there's a civil justice folk out there that is chomping at the bit to answer that, because the answer is a bit different. I think now that we can't put ourselves in various places physically, and that we're doing this also online. So I think that's something that I know that the justice community is really wrestling with, is not to be so excited about certain technologies that they aren't aware of the concerns, like people not having the internet, not having data minutes, not to do all we are saying is great now that it's remote, but that doesn't, we're not really ensuring access. You know, I'm going to say something that's just going to seem like a pass on this, but many of you know the late Judge Ralph Gantz in Massachusetts. And the answer really is to help having a well-being frame and working so upstream on the intervention and prevention that you prevent someone's social and economic issue from becoming a legal issue altogether. I mean, that if we can aim there, then I think we can work on the supports at the time of crisis, but we'll have avoided more of the crisis, and so that it says cost shifting. And shifting the emphasis more upstream. But someone else on the phone may well have a better answer to that good question.
And if you do, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you, or certainly you can use chat to type in responses and resources you know about. Thank you so much, Sarah. There is a question about, can you talk more about how reform in the civil legal system happens? And the second part of that is, do the changes recommended by the blueprint typically require legislative change at the local, state, or federal level? And are the types of changes needed able to be put in place through other channels? So I can take the second part if you want to take that first part about, so how does reform happen in the civil legal system?
Such a critical question. As most of you may know, so much of reform happens at individual court level. You know, the courts have certain rules, states have certain rules. There's not a big lever that can be pulled that can make things uniform across the states. Having said that, there is, and in part recognition of this, there's a game-changing effort going on called the Justice for All Project. And Catherine Alternator mentions it in the chat. It's an initiative that comes out of the National Center for State Courts with SRLN as a key partner that is trying to advance across the nation person-centered efforts so that people can get the information they need when they need it in a format they can use, and looking at other partners to help deliver those systems. So they have come up with guidance materials that outlines the kinds of reforms that need to happen. And they're not prescriptive per se, but rather in order to have, again, person-centered language or simplified processes, and letting the individual jurisdictions figure that out. But that's why reform is a little piecemeal, but there are some national groups that are pulling it together to make a larger movement. And then again, I reiterate that I think the Wellbeing Blueprint can provide some of the scaffolding to hold that complexity.
Thank you. So a question about, what do you see as the intersections between the work of the Wellbeing Blueprint, work of RWJF, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, medical legal partnerships? There seem to be synergies, but what unique value does this initiative offer? So I will respond to that. I won't put you on the spot for that one, Sandy. The group of leaders that came together to put together the blueprint, there's a reason why in Sandy's opening remarks, she called it a living document. We know that, first of all, that this isn't everything that needs to be done. And that, you know, every time we have a Wellbeing Blueprint event, we try to end with the ask of, help us shape this, right? For us, this really is a starting place. We only know what we know, and we know that there are tons of aligned and very, related efforts and initiatives and things that are run by philanthropy, that government is doing, nonprofits, different systems that are doing. And we want to be able to hear about those and have those as part of the blueprint. The point is for this not to just be this static document and that's it. We've got over 40 recommendations. We want to double, triple that size. We know that there's lots of good work already going on, and we invite all of you to be a part of this community. I think the value we see as the Blueprint community is an opportunity and a space to really bring together sort of unlikely champions together. So Sandy talked about, so often we're in our silos, within our fields, within our issue area, government people only talking to government people, community folks not interacting with government systems. And we see the Blueprint community really as a platform and opportunity to bring together all kinds of leaders and really under this common commitment and vision towards driving structural change and everyone having a fair shot at well-being. So that's how we see our value. And I would say if there are folks on this call who haven't connected with the Blueprint yet in terms of signing up to stay updated, signing on to the Blueprint, we really want and need you as part of this community. And if there are others that you think should join, please spread the news. But that's how we see this. We're not here to the Blueprint community and the recommendations and principles aren't here to replace or supplant the good work. It's really to build on that, to lift up what's already working, and to bring people together in some new and different ways to really advance the work. And we've got folks can continue to put in questions. We've still got a little bit more time. I'm going to go back to you, Catrice, because I see your hand is raised. So, Casey. Yep, maybe that was just
No, that's me.
Nope. Okay. Yep, I can hear you now. Wonderful.
I was having a little bit of technical difficulties.
No problem. Go ahead, Catrice.
I just put something in the comment section, but I'll elaborate. When it comes to silos, what I've seen doing community advocacy work over the years and nonprofit work and things of that nature is, a lot of siloing comes from funders. And what I mean by that is they dictate how things are going to go. So it creates, the way funders are set up, it creates this competition amongst nonprofits where they fear other people who are doing what they're doing. Someone down the street is doing the same thing you're doing, but you won't work together because you need the money. And you fear if you work together, you'll lose the money, because they act like there's a scarcity of resources when there's plenty of resources to go around. But they teach us there's a scarcity of them, so we are kind of afraid to collaborate with each other. So that's one issue we need to deal with when it comes to silos. I don't know if there's any funders on the line who can speak to what you may be working on to make that not the type of environment that social good people have to work in. Also, self. People tend to leave out self. Why are you in this sector? Who are you as a person? Why do you do what you do? Self is usually left out of the conversation, but needs to be talked about because that often drives how you engage with others, how you engage with the community that you'll be working with, and also how you engage with other nonprofits, other people in the social good sector. When you are secure in self and why you're doing what you're doing, you don't see the community as people who are incompetent and capable of being being empowered, but you can only serve them. You don't see the person down the street doing the same thing you're doing as a threat. You see them as someone you can work with. So it's really about looking at self first, and also then looking at how funders are divvying out money and teaching us how we should behave and challenging that.
Thank you, Catrice.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me invite some other questions. There's still a little bit of time. And I want to, if Emma, if you could get us to the next slide. There are a whole bunch of resources that Sandy mentioned in her presentation. So I want to just make sure those got up on the screen. And don't worry, you don't have to furiously write all these down. The slides and a recording of this webinar will be up on the Wellbeing Blueprint site, and we'll make sure you get that link when that's ready. But just wanted to make sure folks saw some of the resources that have been mentioned, and Sandy's contact information. She has been so gracious to, hey, if folks want to reach out to me, you know, share my email, which is wonderful. So making sure folks have that as well.
If you do write me though, I want to ask for the discipline of, well, you can write me actually with anything you want, but I would love it as I work with the team at Full Frame and the Blueprint to build on this. If you could say, if you're in the justice community, you know, our civil justice work advanced being by, and then tell me why. And then likewise, if you're in the larger social sector, to say our interface with the civil justice efforts advances well-being by, and sort of giving some examples about it. You can also share your frustrations and obstacles, but I think it would be helpful to add to the examples that I've already pulled together.
Sandy, this is a follow-up, I think, to the point Catrice was just making about funders. So someone also interested in that funder question, and funders don't see civil justice as anti-poverty, as an anti-poverty strategy. How do we go about changing that?
Oh, gosh. No, I know. Having been in philanthropy, I couldn't, and many of you know Mary McClimate, who used to be at Public Welfare. She did such heavy lifting in this space with our colleagues, philanthropic colleagues. I wish I have hope, and when you have hope, you keep trying. And maybe having understanding what I heard from my philanthropic colleagues, why they don't make that connection. It's because they can't get past the word legal. And when they hear civil legal, a couple of things happen. Well, you know, you have to get past the fact that they don't understand that, as many in the general public, that there's no right to counsel. So you have to kind of help them with that. Then it becomes, well, it's all about funding attorneys, and you know, attorneys make so much money already. Why should we philanthropy dollars go for that? So you have to work through that. And then it becomes, well, isn't supporting any legal effort all about litigation? Again, you got to work through that. And so when you finally get there, then I think you can have a conversation about the tool. I think one of the things, you're going to just have to manage up, is basically the bottom line, and lead with the outcome. Don't bury the lead. If your work is contributing to a person being able to have more choices and chances at different kinds of housing, or their kids can stay in school, make that outcome front and center, and talk about how and the partnerships that you're going to use to get there. But you're almost going to have to bury the actual tool of legal intervention.
Thanks, Sandy. And I would offer as just a suggestion that, like, what we're doing here on this call, I think is a great step in bringing together, you know, those in the civil legal system and in other systems, and perhaps through the Wellbeing Blueprint community, there are some things that, you know, we could work on together to actually make that case and articulate, that vision that would help philanthropy, see that. So how could we sort of, connect across the systems and use this blueprint community to have those conversations and collectively make that case together. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, everyone, for all of the questions, the comments, the engagement today, and for showing up today. Emma, if you could just get us to our last slide. I think in answering one of the questions, I got to a lot that's on this last slide for closing. We would love, I know there are many who are on this call and it's your first sort of engagement with the Wellbeing Blueprint in this community. We'd love for you to be a part of this community, to sign on to the Blueprint. We want to know about bright spots and examples. We know that there are many more out there, and this Blueprint will only be as good as, some of those concrete examples of what folks are doing and what's working. To help drive structural change. And we need your continuing help to help shape this. So we make sure that this truly is a living document. There was so much engagement on this call. One of the things that, if you sign on to the Blueprint, the signers are sort of a community unto themselves and have access to additional opportunities and events. And so I know Sandy is doing one of our signer calls next week, I believe, to dig a little deeper on this topic. So if you are left wanting more at the end of this hour, I urge you to sign on to the Blueprint and you'll get invited to that event as well. And it's a way to connect with other folks across the Blueprint community. So we invite you to reach out to us with ideas and questions. There is a very brief evaluation form that we would love folks to fill out. We want to make sure that these events are meeting your expectations and your needs. So if you've got ideas for future topics, let us know. In the chat, you'll see the link to the form. We'll also follow up in email, but if you have just a couple minutes to do that right away, I urge you to do that. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules and days to join us for this conversation. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.